The Evil Within was developed by Tango Gameworks and published by Bethesda, releasing on the PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and PC on the 14th of October 2014. Now, to give you some background here, Tango was founded in 2010 by Shinji Mikami. He's a living legend, the Mac Daddy of survival horror. Following Resident Evil 4's critical and commercial success, he directed God Hand, which was a thing. Following that, he departed Capcom for Platinum Games to direct the awesome but commercially underwhelming Vanquish, and then decided to pursue creative passions with his own studio, and thus Tango Gameworks was born. Mikami originally set out to make an open-world sci-fi game with horror aspects, but after issues with concept creation, the project pivoted to classic survival horror, and the result of that was The Evil Within, seeking to put the survival back into survival horror. Now, with a pedigree as big as Shinji Mikami's, you'd expect The Evil Within to hit it out of the park when it comes to critical reception, especially when you consider his previous two works. Well, it ended up scoring at 75%, which isn't bad, but it's not particularly impressive either. When it comes to sales, it fared a lot better, selling approximately 4 million units. Looking back, I remember when the game was first marketed, hearing Shinji Mikami was coming back to the survival horror genre was enough to send me into a fever pitch. I couldn't wait to smell what he was cooking. When I got the game on its release, however, it just didn't hit for me, and I ended up moving on to other games 3 or so hours into the experience. Now, that was 8 years ago. It's high time I go back and give the game a true shot, and that's exactly what I've done. Taking me just shy of 15 hours, I've completed the game, and this review I'm going to break down what works, what doesn't, and answer the question, is The Evil Within worth your time in 2022? Now, this review, as with all my others, will be split into plot, gameplay, and presentation, and I will be going into spoilers. So let's dive in. Right, where do I start with this? I'm going to be perfectly honest with you all. I've got some major issues when it comes to this plot. Could it be that I'm an idiot and I don't understand it fully? Maybe. Or could it be the game is littered with plot holes, and from where I'm sitting, I've seen less holes on Pornhub? Now let's unpack this. Crimson City. A call to investigate the Beacon Memorial Hospital leads Sebastian Castellanos and his partners Joseph Oda and Julie Kidman to a scene straight out of your nightmares. It's a bloodbath. Bodies litter the halls, but who or what caused it? Checking the CCTV, Sebastian sees a ghostly apparition murder other officers with the kind of powers that would make Wesker start sweating. This entity appears behind Sebastian, knocking him out. Waking in the basement, Sebastian begins an adventure which will lead him peering into the darkness that resides in us all. So looking at the story itself, it's told to us through cutscenes and file pickups which flesh out Sebastian and his partner's backstory. Now, these files are incredible. By the time the game wraps, you get the full story on what led Sebastian to this point, the difficulties he's endured throughout his police career, and the loss of his daughter, which led him to alcohol abuse. You typically find these files by a save room, and I found myself looking forward to learning more about our hero. I just wish I could say the same when it comes to the wider plot. Told to us through cutscenes, flashbacks, and the odd audio diary, you piece together that the nightmare world you're experiencing is a shared consciousness of the ghostly entity Ruvik. He designs a machine called STEM, which links consciousnesses together. The purpose? Ruvik wanted to physically travel back into his memories and live his life again with his sister Laura, who died following a tragic barn fire. On our journey through the mind of a madman, we learn Dr. Jimenez helped the young Ruvik with test subjects to complete his research and finalize creation of STEM. Jimenez reports the findings of the STEM system to a secret organization called Morbius, who want to use STEM for their own purposes. What purposes, I hear you ask? Apart from Morbin, I'm at a total loss with who this organisation are and what they want to do with STEM. Now it may well be answered in the DLC, but for me, that's a shitty proposition. It's the same way I feel about the new Star Wars trilogy. A compelling plot should stand on its own. It shouldn't need DLC or any additional content to be able to tell a full story. Putting that to the side for the moment, there's other issues that drag the experience down here, and it's the story pacing. The plot that is here is told so late into the game, you're left with your mouth open and a scowl on your face as you try to piece together any sort of theory to make sense on what you're seeing. And by the time you get some of the explanations some 10 hours in, it's full of plot holes. A plot should carry you through an experience to make you ask the questions, why am I doing this? What is causing this to happen? These are questions which should evoke a need to find answers and push you on. But when those answers are raised so late into the experience, and then missing key details to tie the experience together, I found myself not caring at all. There's only so long you can sit there like this. What is going on, man? The other issue with the plot is Sebastian himself. I mentioned his backstory in the files is engaging, and that's true. However, when it comes to the man himself, he's lacking in any real character. He's witnessing the stuff of nightmares, and he never comments on it. Emotions just don't seem to exist for him, and without any compelling dialogue or signs of character growth, he's just a vessel for the player. And in a game which goes on for 15 hours, you'd expect to care about him and what he's going through. But to him, it just seems like any other day on the job. And that created a barrier between me as a player and the character himself, stopping any form of bond blossoming. Your fellow detectives, in Joseph and Kidman, don't fare well either. I didn't find myself caring what happened to them. They pop up frequently in the story, but they didn't add anything to it. They just exist. It's a damn shame. Looking over the plot, it's balls to the walls insane, full of unique imagery and engaging environments, but the characters that are supposed to tie you into this world aren't up to the task of bringing you along for the journey with any sense of emotional attachment. The more I played the game, the less I cared about what happened to any of the cast, and why we were doing what we were doing. The plot is by far the weakest part of the overall package. It feels like Shinji Mikami had a great idea on paper, but wasn't sure how to execute it in a way that captivates the player. On first glance, you'd think The Evil Within is just an updated RE4, but in reality, it's far deeper. So, what's the same? Well, much like RE4, the camera is behind the player and moves up to over the shoulder for aiming. The vast majority of the enemies are villagers that use tools and weapons. They can climb through windows and open doors to pursue Sebastian, and to combat these, you're given an arsenal of weapons, and through combat, you earn the currency needed to upgrade to make your future battles easier. All very similar to RE4. However, there's some key changes which improve the formula, adapting it to a true survival horror experience. Firstly, the resources are limited. Like, extremely limited. I played the game through on the Survivor difficulty, and not once throughout my entire playthrough did I find myself sitting comfortable. I seemed to always have just enough to survive, but never enough that I could go Rambo without a care in the world. That's a hard thing to balance, and I commend Tango for creating the feeling of apprehension I experienced every time I entered an area. I never felt like I was in control of the situation, like I had the upper hand on the enemies. Every encounter was a test on how little I could use to get through an area, and I found myself reloading checkpoints multiple times to run it more efficiently than I had before. Now, as you explore the environment, you'll find heals, ammo, and green goo, which you use to upgrade Sebastian and his arsenal, and these upgrades are essential if you're to survive the trials ahead. Upgrades are split into categories. You can upgrade Sebastian himself, improving melee damage, sprint distance, or giving yourself more health. Weapons-wise, you can improve the damage, accuracy, reloading speed, or upping the critical hit chance. to kill enemies in a single bullet. Or you can put points into increasing your stock so you can hold more items in your inventory. Green goo is everywhere, earned by killing enemies or hidden across the environment. There's not enough to upgrade everything on a first run, and when you spend it, you can't reclaim it, so you better think carefully on what you want to improve. Do you skip upgrading now to save up for the extra health, or do you bang what you have now into your weapons to reload quicker and get back in the fight? It's up to you, but you'll have to live with the consequence of that choice. I found myself staring at the menu, weighing up my options every time I entered a save room, and by the end game, I was really hating myself for some of the upgrades I shelled out for earlier in my playthrough. Fortunately, The Evil Within offers a New Game Plus option, and I'm looking forward to taking my endgame Sebastian through another run, so I can get some payback on all the enemies that kicked my ass in the early game.
The hell are you supposed to be? I'm vengeance.
In exploring the environments, you'll have to contend with the myriad of enemies blocking your path. This presents its own choices. Do you slow down and sneak your way through, taking the odd enemy out with stealth kills, but potentially put yourself in a situation where you could get spotted and it all spirals out of control? Do you instead study the enemy routes and set up traps with your agony crossbow to eliminate multiple threats in quick succession? Or do you go guns blazing and just hope for the best? The choice is yours. If it ever gets too hectic, The Evil Within gives you places to hide and reset. Hiding in a locker, chucking yourself under a car, or hiding under the bed. They're all useful in trying to pull yourself back from an unwinnable situation. And the tension this creates when you're on your last bullet, with dwindling health cowering under the bed, while enemies are shuffling down the halls, is enough to make you wish you'd worn brown boxers that day. The tension is heightened by another mechanic: light. Sebastian finds a lantern early on in the game. The light given off by this doesn't extend far, but it can be the only source of light in a given area, and without it, you're in total darkness. What's interesting is that slowing down and entering the crouched state provides a better angle for the light, which gives you the ability to take in more of your environment, sacrificing speed and mobility for sight. Now what's really amazing is enemies will react to this light. They will spot you far easier if you have the torch on, and so stealth-wise, it becomes essential to toggle on and off the light to get by enemies unscathed. To give you a little helping hand, on top of the HUD you'll see a visual indicator if an enemy has spotted you, or if they're patrolling the area. Now 9 times out of 10, I found this indicator appear before I'd even noticed an enemy was in the area, and it was terrifying. Frantically searching for the whereabouts of an enemy while flicking the light on and off to keep myself concealed slowed the game down and upped the anxiety to record heights. No matter how hard you try, you can't hide from every threat, and inevitably you will find yourself engaging in combat. I'm glad to say it's visceral. Enemies explode in gore, heads pop from a shotgun blast, and bodies are pinned to walls with your agony crossbow. I quickly learned that Sebastian is fragile. Enemies hit with ferocity, and even if you're tooled up going into an encounter, that ammo doesn't last as long as you'd think it would. Enemies can take some real damage, and that is where using your head comes in. Sebastian has the ability to burn enemies with matches. Burning a downed enemy will kill them immediately. The beauty of this system is using the matches to take out multiple enemies without wasting your resources. My strategy completely revolved around them. Blast an enemy to the ground, wait for his buddies to approach, and burn them all up in one go. Flexing your creativity is key to success in The Evil Within, and the weapon that makes it all possible is the agony crossbow. This weapon is the dictionary example of versatility. By finding scrap in the environments or by disabling traps, you can build 5 different types of bolt. Freeze rounds instantly kill most enemies, or stun larger ones, so you can unload your heavy hitting weapons without any danger. Shock bolts deal minor damage, but they stun enemies, allowing you to reposition or get some easy burn kills. Flashbolts put all enemies into a dazed state, leading to easy stealth kills, or to get yourself out of a bad situation. Explosive bolts can be shot into the enemy to cause an explosion and big damage, or you can shoot them into the environment, creating mines. And finally, you've got the harpoon bolt, a projectile which will pin enemies to the walls, causing massive damage. It's also the only weapon in the base game that's silent, and it becomes essential for stealth. Each bolt has their own crafting requirements, and the choice of which bolt to craft and when to craft it becomes just as important as hitting your shots. If you haven't guessed by now, choice is what makes survival horror for me. In The Evil Within, it's built into every facet of its design, and I applaud it for that. However, there's some design decisions here that I just can't get on board with. I mentioned that to earn scrap for bolts, you can find it in the environment or by disabling traps. Now these traps are a goddamn nightmare. They come in a number of forms, from tripwires to bear traps, and I've got no issue with those. But these are an act against God. To disarm them, you need to stop a needle in the blue area. You have one shot at this. If you get it wrong, they explode, which deals half your health. What doesn't help matters is this needle has lag. You click to stop it, and it just keeps going, meaning you have to press it in advance. Heals are extremely limited in The Evil Within, and it just isn't worth the risk for 3 scrap. I died time after time to these bastards, and never felt like, I'll get it next time. I just avoided them, instead using them as a tool to blow up some enemies. It just doesn't seem fair. By failing it, you've already lost out on gaining scrap, but then to lose half your health at the same time?
What a load of old shit!
Speaking of unfair, earlier I mentioned that enemies dish out damage. Well, here's my endgame stats. Yeah, this game kicked my ass. My problem isn't that it's hard, which it is. It's more the fact the game loves things that kill you in one shot. Boss fights in particular are terrible for this. You'll be wailing into an enemy and then, whoop-de-doo, you're dead. You'll be at full health with 2 heals in the bag, but nah, get fucked kid, you're dead. And it's not just bosses. Environment traps can kill you just out of nowhere too. Now this one time I survived a massive wave of enemies and had to activate a trap and run under it to get out of the room. The trap suddenly comes down and just shreds me, causing me to replay the entire fight again. It's like Mikami got inspiration from Dark Souls 2. The game just likes to fuck with you. It's not a case of learning from past mistakes and improving your gameplay going forward. Instead, it expects you to know things that you just possibly can't know, and then punishes you for it. There's no fun in that. It's just tedious, aggravating, and genuinely unfair. It's a blight on an otherwise great gameplay experience, and one which does crop up more times than it has any right to. I played The Evil Within on the PlayStation 5, running the PS4 version in backwards compatibility mode. The benefit to this is the game runs at 1080p with a locked 30 FPS. The issue is, that locked 30 FPS is bullshit. The game is choppy as all hell as soon as the action starts popping off. Frames drop all over the place. Now, I'm not a person who typically notices frame dips. I used to not be able to tell the difference between 30 and 60, which my fellow podcast host Spencer constantly likes to remind me. So if I'm seeing these frame dips, take it from me, it's pretty bad. Now I can't imagine how bad this would run on a PS3, or even a base PS4. It must be a nightmare. Fortunately, these dips aren't game breaking. It's an infrequent annoyance, but nothing too detrimental to the overall experience. When it comes to the visuals, this too is a mixed bag, and will purely come down to your own taste. Out of the box, the game is set to a letterboxed aspect ratio of 235, with screen grain out the wazoo. It's clear that Shinji Mikami wanted the game to feel cinematic, but players weren't thrilled by this forced choice. Tango eventually listened, and a patch was released in June of 2015, which gave us the option to change this to a traditional 16:9. As soon as I realised it was in the options, I turned it to 16:9, but I kept the screen grain. Why? Well, for me, I enjoy the atmosphere that's created with its muddy look. Don't get me wrong, there's times it's detrimental, especially when it comes to taking in the environments in all their majesty. I think with this one, it's definitely personal choice. There isn't a right or wrong way to go about it. I'd suggest playing with the options and settle on what you prefer. No matter which way you choose to play it, one thing that's consistent is how stunning the game is. The environments are truly unique. One minute you're in a village reminiscent of RE4, and the next you're in a cityscape taken straight from Inception. Exploring Ruvik's brain gave Tango the ability to go crazy with design, and they definitely succeeded here. It's the same story when it comes to character models and lighting too. It all looks fantastic. Continuing on the positivity train here, the sound design is incredible. Every weapon is punchy, enemies emit moans and screams which get my blood curdling, and the soundtrack is equally as impressive. The use of classical music in Clair de Lune as the save room theme immediately puts you on high alert, but a few hours in, it becomes the sweet sound of safety. This score has hit after hit, Long Way Down, Air on a G-string, and the rest of the OST is just pure terror. The panic strings and loud bass during boss fights strikes that part of my primal brain, causing a fight or flight response. It's simply outstanding. I think it's at this point I'll end with the enemy and boss design. Across your playthrough, you're going to encounter the types of enemies that make you wonder if the team at Tango are still mentally sane. Each enemy type is unique from the last, from the basic Haunted, who are essentially Ganados, to the Keeper with a safe on his head. The game just keeps throwing grotesque monstrosities at you, and through experience in combat, you'll learn how to best each of these. Now, it's in the combination of these differing enemies within an environment that really gets the old grey matter working. Doppelgangers, in particular, became my number one target on the field. They're fairly easy to take down if it's a one-on-one, but as soon as you have a few Haunted blocking your path, they can prove a worthy challenge. Excluding the Haunted, who granted are fairly generic, the remainder of the enemies are truly unique and offer enough challenge and diversity in their abilities to strike fear in even the hardiest survival horror veteran. Now, it's the bosses that are the real showstopper. They are all incredibly varied, with some becoming more environmental puzzles than straight up fights. The standouts for me are the various encounters with Laura, setting fire to bodies to stop her respawning, and luring her into traps to set her ablaze, put me on the edge of my seat. When it comes to the battles with the rest of the bosses, one moment you're battling an invisible octopus searching for it in the vents, and the next thing you're on the back of a jeep firing a 50 cal while you're getting hit around like you're in Dragon Ball Z. It's wild, but I went with it, and I found myself really enjoying every fight. Well, almost every fight.
Don't you dare get eaten again, you fucking prick. No, I'm gonna die again, aren't I? Let's fucking go! Jesus, fuck you. Fuck you, man.
The Evil Within sees Shinji Mikami return to the world of survival horror. He took the lessons he learnt with RE4 and focused the experience around a pure horror experience, one that gives you plenty of choice and limits resources. It's easily the hardest survival horror game I've ever played. It's just a shame that with a length of 15 hours, it doesn't tell a great story. In fact, it struggles at all to convey the story in any meaningful way. and this can cause the game to drag, as you don't know where it's going or what it's building to. This isn't helped by a cast of characters who individually aren't appealing, and as a group, add nothing to the experience. Personally, I wish the game had cut a few chapters and tightened the overall experience, or failing that, they just reworked the plot and the cast to grab us, the player, and engage us into the experience. Gameplay-wise, it's near perfect, only let down by its near sadistic levels of trial and error, especially when it comes to one-hit kills. For anyone that's skipped the game or not given it a full playthrough, I'd encourage you to see it through. Sure, it's got issues, but stick with it, and I assure you, you'll be glad you gave it a chance. Season passes are a staple in modern video gaming, a tool designed to provide additional content for the consumer, a reason to keep the games you buy rather than sell them on eBay. Historically, I avoid them like the plague, but there have been exceptions where the DLC included is well worth the price of admission. Following my Evil Within video, you can find that here if you haven't seen it yet, I was left with a game I loved playing, but one that felt incomplete. So when I saw the season pass follow Detective Kidman and would unravel the mystery behind Mobius, I knew I had to give it a shot. Developed by Tango Gameworks and published by Bethesda, the season pass released on the 10th of March 2015 with subsequent drops in the following 2 months. It's split into 3 parts: the assignment, the consequence, and the executioner. The assignment and the consequence are 2 chapters each of the same story, and as such, I'll cover them as a single entity before looping back to the executioner. During the course of this review, I'll explain what works, what doesn't, and ultimately, if this season pass is essential playing or essentially pointless. And it's important to note here, this review I will be going through full spoilers. So let's dive in. Starting before the events of the base game and running alongside it, we play as Julie Kidman, a junior detective to the KCPD and partner of Sebastian Castellanos and Joseph Oda. We learn that Kidman was rescued from the gutter by Mobius, providing her with her own apartment and a job at the KCPD, and in exchange, she becomes an agent for them, serving their purposes above all others and ensuring she keeps Sebastian off their tracks. So who are Mobius, and what are their plans for STEM? This was a major issue for me in the base game, but here, it's finally answered. Mobius are a secret organization that have major influence on the world stage. Think of them like the Illuminati, pulling all the strings from the shadows. And their plan is to use STEM to influence entire populations to make them bow down to their will. Truly evil stuff. So what else do we learn? Mobius worked with Jimenez and Rubin to fund the creation of STEM. They were unhappy working with somebody as damaged as Rubin, and so to make himself indispensable, Rubin geared the machine so it would only work with his brainwaves. This didn't stop Mobius, and so, upon the project's completion, they eliminated him and stuck his brain in the center of the machine. Unfortunately, we know how insane Rubin really is, and even in death, his brainwaves are still enough to control STEM, inflicting untold horror upon anyone plugged into the system. So how did they hope to fix this? Leslie is a match for Rubin's brainwaves based on trauma he experienced in his life, and so if they can get Leslie, they can whip his brain out, bin off Rubin, and chuck it in, and they'll have no one to stop them. The plot is insane, but at least I now understand it. And that's not the only thing that I wanted to know over the course of the base game. How did everyone get in STEM if you need to be physically plugged into it? Well, the answer, it's wireless. The high-pitched ringing you hear is your subconscious being linked to the system. I was so happy to have all these blanks filled in, and I'm glad to say the delivery of this, with Kidman seeing the danger that would be unleashed if Leslie was allowed to live, and fighting against her orders from Mobius, was engaging from start to end. Told through cutscenes, file pickups and audio diaries, the story is not only acted incredibly well from its cast, it's also visually engaging. Locations change frequently, from the familiar locales of the base game to the cold sterile offices of Mobius, and in switching between these, the game doesn't feel like it's retreading old ground. It feels like it has something fresh to show you at every turn, and nowhere is this more apparent than the gameplay itself. In a complete change from the base game, here, Kidman is weaponless for the vast majority of the DLC, instead relying purely on stealth to get through the horrors that await her around every corner. In the base game, you could crouch, throw bottles to lure enemies, and hide in lockers when it all got a bit chaotic. Now all of that returns, but here, Kidman can snap to cover and lure enemies with a quick shout. Woohoo! And that's not all. She can also use the environment to her advantage, ring in phones to lure an enemy to a location and then lock them in place, or yell out to bring them into the path of a trap. Sneaking around the environment and running when you're spotted with no real way to defend yourself is usually a turn-off for me when it comes to horror games. Games like Outlast or the myriad of clones that spawned in its wake aren't my cup of tea. I like to know I can engage with a threat if I want to, even if the outcome results in certain death, and that is why I'm so surprised that I loved this. It felt more like I was playing Metal Gear than I was in a horror game. Now, don't get me wrong, I was cacking my pants in most scenarios, but I felt like I was actually in control. In part, this is due to the AI being essentially blind as soon as you enter cover, and so figuring out a route across an environment, luring enemies here, throwing bottles there. It was more like a puzzle rather than a trial and error reset fest, which it could have easily turned into. You normally enter an area and can assess the threat in front of you before moving through the environment. It doesn't throw enemies randomly your way. It makes it very clear what you're about to deal with, and in its simplicity, it succeeds. When things went wrong, and they did, I knew it was on me. Now with any game, there's only so long you can do the same thing over and over again until you get bored. Fortunately, Tango Gameworks knew this, and so, to spice things up, you'll go into an area without enemies, and it's here you get either story exposition or puzzles. These puzzles come in a few forms. They'll either be lights you need to activate in a particular sequence, dials which are covered in blood which hint at the code, or you'll need to find the answer around the environment. Using the flashlight, you can focus the light using L2, and with this, it'll reveal secrets. Either codes or sometimes whole new rooms for you to get even more lore or another puzzle. I found myself constantly walking around scanning the environment in hopes of uncovering more secrets. With each safe you solve, you get parts of a torn letter, and when you have all of the parts, you can put it together and get a final chunk of lore. The puzzles are not only a great inclusion in keeping the experience engaging, I found them well designed and unique enough from each other to never become tedious. But sometimes, you need a little pizzazz, a little bit of spice to up the stakes and rise the tension. Sometimes, you need a boss battle. Throughout the 2 DLCs, you're pursued by a lamp with lady legs. It's the kind of creature that Disney send after you if you pirate any of Pixar's work. Shade, as it's aptly known, sets up for the cinematic moments that pepper the first 3 chapters. One moment you'll be waiting for an elevator to arrive while dodging its line of sight, and the next, you're trapped under rubble, frantically reaching for a pistol before blowing away tons of enemies. It's heart-pounding stuff that had me on the edge of my seat, and when you finally get a chance to pump her full of loads of ammo, it's truly satisfying. The other bosses across the game, in Joseph, the copies of yourself, and the administrator, are all unique from each other, and they're all a joy to overcome. Within a few moments, you'll know what you have to do and how to beat it, and as the game gives you respawning ammo and health which recovers if you stay still for a while, there isn't the same frustration I had with a few of the bosses in the base game. It's overall a much easier experience, and that's the same for the rest of the game. Now, there's pros and cons to this. In structuring everything around stealth, it feels very linear, which in turn ups the pacing, but strips away the choice and the self-doubt that comes from resource management. You never have to wonder if you've made a right or wrong choice, as there really isn't any. If you go into this expecting to have a survival horror experience like the base game, you may be disappointed here, but for me, I felt it worked on nearly every level. The stealth was simple, yet satisfying, the bosses were memorable, and the plot was essential. In fact, my only critique with the assignment and the consequence are that this shouldn't have been sold separately. To understand the entire plot of The Evil Within, you need to play this. Cutting this content out and selling it as 2 separate packs feels dirty. The amount of people that must have completed the base game and never gone back for this must be massive. And that's a damn shame, as they're missing out on the piece of content that ties the entire game together. If you've been putting off playing this for whatever reason, I encourage you to put aside 5 hours and get it done. It was a joy from start to end. Now I wish I could say that about the Executioner. Oh god, here we go. You know the Keeper. He's the enemy with a safe for a head. At any point in the base game, did you ever think, God, I wish I could play as him? No one did, but they decided to give it to us anyway. It's such a weird mode. For starters, there's a plot. Of course there is. It's the story of a dad who enters STEM to bring back his daughter, but does so in the body of a keeper. The game is essentially this. You enter a room, kill all the enemies, follow a ghost of your daughter, read her notes, and repeat this for an hour. There's no voice work, there's 2 really basic cutscenes, and there's no new enemies. The story is so bare bones and pointless, I don't even know why they even bothered to try. The gameplay fares a little better. Shifting to a first-person perspective, you go on a power trip. Enemies are pure fodder. You start with the Keeper's giant hammer and some barbed wire mines. With these, you hit an enemy a couple of times and then get an option to either execute, in frankly a cool animation, or throw them. Chucking enemies into hazards in the environment, or at each other, is pretty cool. It's not just enemies you can throw either. It gives you the option to live out all your WWE fantasies. When you kill enemies, you earn coins. These coins can be used to upgrade your stats or buy new gear. Now, as the story progresses, you unlock new tools such as chainsaws, RPGs, and Molotovs, which you can then use to inflict some extra punishment on the poor bastards that are having to fight against you. You move from one room to another to get to the next boss encounter, and if you want, you can take on some extra areas called torments, which are side arenas with stacks of enemies. Here, you can earn a decent amount of loot to go and spend on the upgrades, if you really care enough. The issue is, it's incredibly easy, and 30 minutes in, I was bored as all hell, until I made one change.
Think we'll go with a little Bohemian Rhapsody, gentlemen?
Good call.
This change saved it for me. The Executioner became a shit version of Doom, but with melee combat. It was enough to carry me through the rest of the mode, but without any kind of challenge and an uninteresting plot, I can't recommend it to anyone. Recommending the Season Pass content included here is a tough one. On one hand, the assignment and the consequence were exactly what I wanted. They filled in all the blanks I had for the base game, and even set up a sequel with the introduction of Myra. It was a joy to play through, but I can't shake the feeling that this content was purposely cut from development to add it into a mandated season pass by parent company Bethesda, and that rubs me up the wrong way. Now, I could be wrong, and this DLC was developed in response to criticism on the main plot, but I doubt it. Now, if I put that to the side, at $20 on its release, the season pass is good value for what is 5 hours of genuinely great content, and if you go back to this now, you can grab it for half price on console and as low as $1.99 on PC, and for that, it's a no-brainer. The executioner may be throwaway trash, solely there to pad out a season pass graphic, but that's not the draw here. The draw is getting a complete story. The Evil Within 2 was developed by Tango Gameworks and published by Bethesda, releasing on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC on the very fitting date of Friday the 13th of October 2017. Releasing 3 years on from its predecessor, I'd love to say it had big expectations, but to be honest with you, I don't remember there being an awful lot of hype going into it. It seemed like any other game, and certainly didn't pique my interest at the time. A sequel is generally expected to grow a franchise, to bring back the players from the first entry, and through their hype, drive eyes towards the next one. But come launch week, The Evil Within 2 came in at less than a quarter of what the original outing did. Now it's hard to see true sales numbers, as Bethesda stopped reporting them not long after its release, but there's no hiding from the fact this game was a disappointment for Tango and Bethesda. But sales aren't always a reflection on quality, so let's check Metacritic.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture.
Okay.
They're the same picture.
So again, not the jump you'd expect from a fledgling franchise. This entry sees Shinji Mikami removed from the director's seat, and the reins handed to John Johannes, who had previously worked on the visual effects for the first entry. Mikami said in an interview it was time to see the younger talent do their thing, something which at Tango he is keen to encourage, to nurture the talent within the studio, while Mikami provides input via a producer role. Now I went into this experience with high expectations. I'd enjoyed the first entry and its DLC greatly, and I'm glad to say that after nearly 20 hours spent with the game, I was blown away. This review, I'm going to detail why The Evil Within 2 is a survival horror masterpiece. As with all my reviews, I'll break this down into plot, gameplay and presentation, and as a warning, I will be going into spoilers, but not enough to ruin the game for anyone that hasn't played it before. Now let's dive in. Three years have passed since the events of the Beacon Mental Hospital, and we find Sebastian Castellanos at the bottom of a bottle, replaying the moment he lost his daughter in a tragic house fire. To say he's at an all-time low is an understatement. Just imagine being in Sebastian's situation, experiencing the horrors he did in STEM, somehow surviving it, and then no one believes you. And as your mental capacity is questioned, it leads to him losing his position as a KCPD detective. His job was the only constant in his life, his true passion, and now that's been taken away from him. He has nothing left. While he wallows in despair, he's met in a bar by a familiar face, Kidman, and she brings an offer Sebastian can't refuse. Sebastian's daughter Lily is alive, and only he can save her. The shadowy organisation Mobius, who were referenced in the first game and expanded upon greatly in the DLC, are front and centre here. It turns out they stole Lily to use her as the new core for STEM, and faked her death to cover up the kidnapping. The plan for Mobius is the same as the first game, to use STEM as a tool to unite humanity under a hive mind, to link everyone to the system wirelessly and seize ultimate control. But the core has gone missing, and Union has fallen into chaos. And after sending in units of Union soldiers, only for them to meet a grisly end, they turn to the one man who entered STEM before and came out the other side. They turn to Sebastian. And so our story of sacrifice and self-forgiveness begins. Told through cutscenes, collectibles, and radio conversations, the plot of The Evil Within 2 is a simple premise used time and time again in media, and one which we can relate to: the love between a father and a child. In The Evil Within 2, there's no chance you'll get lost on the meaning or lose focus on what the end goal is like there was with the first game. It doesn't dangle story threads like a carrot on a stick. It unfolds naturally over the course of the game, and that's a real positive. In The Evil Within, I struggled to care for Sebastian, for Joseph, for anyone. The only time I learned anything about Sebastian was in the file pickups found by save rooms, and for the vast majority of the game, he was essentially mute. Here, his personality is refined. He self-monologues, he engages with other characters in RPG-esque dialogue options, he identifies when things are going tits up, and reacts to it in a realistic manner. He emotes, and as such, he feels human. Now this is true for all members of the cast. O'Neill, Esmeralda, Sykes and Hoffman. I really cared for these characters and the journeys that they go through over the course of the game. Now partly, that's due to the time we spend with them, and the events that transpire across the game, but it's also to do with their placement. Putting them in safe houses was the best idea possible. You'll be revisiting these time and time again, and as these characters are full of lore, it was a joy to engage with them. Now I'll cover this more in the gameplay section, but using these NPCs as quest givers gives you the opportunity to understand the individual flaws with each character, and by progressing the story, you're watching these non-playable characters develop into fully rounded characters. And that creates a bond, one which really stings when it comes to an untimely end. For as great as the plot is, there's one big negative: the antagonists. You got B-Tech Sander Cohen and Gabriel from The Walking Dead. For the first half of the game, you'll be dealing with Stefano Valentini. He's an artist. Now forget your sunsets and your portraits, he takes modern art to a brand new low.
What the fuck is that?
You first encounter him early in the game, and are taunted frequently by scenes of victims trapped in a time loop of their last moments, accompanied by classical music, and to his credit, it's really unsettling. The numerous encounters with Stefano build to a crescendo which peaks at the theatre, and after the battle concludes, you're then dealing with a motivational speaker who has just assumed the role of cult leader. His name is Theodore Wallace. Now, unlike Stefano, he just doesn't appear threatening in any way. He's trying to lure you onto his side the entire time, and when you resist, he just warps you to different places. There isn't the same feeling of dread or suspense that you have with Stefano. Wallace just feels kinda flat. Sure, he's ultimately responsible for Sebastian overcoming his inner demons and growing as a character, but I would have expected him to feel like a threat, and he just doesn't. For as many faults as the original Evil Within had, Ruvik was unquestionably a great foil, and here in the sequel, we only get that for the first half of the game. But fortunately, even with a lackluster antagonist, it doesn't take away from what is driving the plot: Sebastian's need to reunite his family. And that simple premise was executed with real character growth, meaningful stakes, and an excellent supporting cast. Now, as I start this section, it's important I clarify something which definitely had an impact on my overall experience: the difficulty. After playing The Evil Within 1, I walked away from the experience battered, bruised, and my ego torn to shreds. The game was harsh, cruel even. I fought through the at times unfair experience and reflected on how great it had been to play. So, when I booted The Evil Within 2 and was met with this choice, I had to pause. On one hand, I didn't want to feel kicked in the ballsack over and over again. But then again, I am an experienced survival horror player. I didn't overly enjoy the difficulty of the first game, but I didn't hate it. And then I remembered. I'm not just an experienced survival horror fan. I've been playing nothing but survival horror for the past 2 years. If anyone can ascend to the golden halls of victory, it will be me and me alone. And so I went for it. And it was the best decision I ever could have made. Survival horror, in my mind, is at its best when it has limited resources. It ensures you approach every encounter with caution. Do you go loud and use the ammo you've got, or do you sneak and try to get the drop on the enemies, potentially putting yourself in harm's way if you get spotted? But if you do it right, you'll save that ammo for when you desperately need it. It creates choice and consequence, which to me are essential ingredients in the survival horror genre. Here, in The Evil Within 2, it walks a tightrope which never makes you feel content. The moment you have a huge armory, it's seemingly gone, and you're back to using your wits to get by. It creates a feast and famine of resources that, in my experience, hasn't been done better anywhere. So, why is that? Well, it's all to do with the game mechanics. Now let me explain. The Evil Within gave us an upgrade system in the green gel. This was found across the environment and occasionally dropped by enemies. With this resource, you could upgrade Sebastian's personal stats like his health or stamina, or you could use it to level his arsenal. In killing enemies, you were rewarded mostly with ammo, which again you could find around the environment. The Evil Within 2 takes things up a notch. The green goo returns, but now is solely used for upgrading Sebastian himself. To ensure it's still as valuable as it was before, the skill tree has been expanded upon greatly. Health and stamina return, but they're accompanied by stealth, combat, and recovery. These skill trees will dictate how you approach different situations. Stealth was my first priority. I wanted to save as much ammo as possible, and so, when I was presented with enemies in my way, I took my time to lure them, to separate the herd and take them down. Now, as I leveled the stealth tree, I gained the ability to stealth kill around corners, to make my footsteps even quieter, and to eventually stalk the enemies with a quick dash before dealing the death blow. Now, if I'd gone the combat route, I could have reduced my recoil, steadied my aim, and eventually slowed down time itself. Now, unlike the first game, green gel is found pretty much exclusively by killing enemies. It encourages you to engage with the threats ahead and rewards you for your troubles. And with how essential these upgrades felt, I was compelled to figure out the best way to overcome situations to get my mitts on that gooey goodness. And when it comes to your weapons, they too can be upgraded, and that is done through a new resource: weapon parts. These are found across the environment, and the game offers a staggering amount of weapons, but a finite amount of weapon parts. The difference in utility between a base weapon and its upgraded versions are simply staggering. If we take the crossbow as an example here, you have 5 different types of bolt: freeze, harpoon, smoke, shock, and explosive, and they all serve a purpose, but depending on your playstyle, you'll naturally favour some more than the others. Now, as I was so dedicated to stealth and ammo conservation, I moved towards the smoke bolts, putting all my weapon parts into them. At base level, they create a wall of smoke to give you a window to reset when things go south. But upgraded, they become a tool to bring the fight to the enemy. By chucking down a smoke bolt, any enemy caught inside the smoke are able to be stealth killed. And if you're smart, you can get a group of enemies taken off the field in quick succession. And it doesn't stop there. In the wise words of a certain Super Saiyan,
And this
What's he doing?
is to go even further beyond!
The Evil Within 2 adds a crafting menu. No longer are you reliant on what the game gives you as far as ammo and health is concerned. Now you can make your own. As with the gel and the parts, the crafting items are found on corpses or dotted around the environment. This system starts simple enough with gunpowder, which can be used in various quantities to craft different ammo. For example, a pistol round costs 3 gunpowder, while a rifle bullet costs 8, which denotes the difference in power. Now, as the game progresses, crafting expands to the different types of bolt, which all use different recipes to craft. and health syringes, which are split into their own subcategory of herbs. Now what's truly remarkable is the game gives you two ways to craft. You can do it at a workbench, or you can do it in the field, giving you the chance to craft in a dire situation. But there's a major drawback. The cost is increased. It essentially penalizes you for not planning ahead.
Perfection.
To accommodate all this, the game makes one huge change from the original. It's moved to a semi-open world. Chapter 3 is the first introduction of this, giving the player the ability to explore the residential district till their heart's content. The main mission is highlighted on the map, and you can go and do this at any point. But you won't want to. Houses and streets can be combed through for crafting and upgrade materials, NPCs issue side quests, and the communicator will bleep when you're near a resonance or ammo pickup, and every one of these activities is meaningful. It's the way to find new weapons, to get kitted up with ammo, or to deepen the lore. In fact, the side quests and resonances around the environment set up for some of the best scares in the entire game. By investigating these, you'll find yourself face to face with Anima, a ghostly apparition that stalks Sebastian playing a mangled version of Claire de Lune, and calling his name in the same way the bird from the ring would if she was trying to lure you into bed. When this happens, these moments become highly scripted, built to maximize fear, and to put it bluntly, I shit my pants. My arm burst into goosebumps, and I could feel a lump in my throat as I white-knuckled the controller. The tension and apprehension were palpable, and to think that I could have walked past these and not been any wiser, it's just mind-blowing. Side quests and activities are only as useful as the reward for your time, and by giving big payoffs to the player in terms of lore or resources, they felt essential. By moving to an open world, it gives the player a chance to flex their creativity, to find ways to overcome the threats in your wake, and by building the gameplay around upgrades and crafting, it beckons you to go off the beaten path and take in Union for all its glory, to seek out greater dangers for greater reward, to make a choice on how you use your resources, and if it's worth engaging with the challenge in front of you. I'm always banging on about choice in this genre, and nowhere have I seen it be built into every facet of its design so eloquently. Every system binds together to make your experience one which is filled with minute decisions, which coalesce into gameplay-altering strategies. I'm really struggling to find a fault with this game. The only thing I can say is a negative, and to be honest, this is really scraping the barrel here, is that with a game length as long as this, you'll come across the same enemy types over and over again, and as you play, you'll come up with your own strategies on how to turn these once formidable foes into child's play. Take the Harbingers. The first time I saw one in the open, it kicked my ass, but after several fiery deaths, I learnt I could cheese them with a simple bit of stealth, and from there, they became nothing more than a goldmine for green goo. Now this negative is overcome by combining the different enemies into groups, which makes you stop and think about the best order to take out the threats in front of you, but it's still something I wanted to raise. Now there's so much more I could harp on about when it comes to its positives, from finding statues in the environment which give you access to rewards, or the 2 mini games in the shooting range, but I'm going to end this section with one final positive. I mentioned at the start of this section that I chose Nightmare for my experience, a game mode which is designed for fans of the original game's base difficulty. The original game reveled in one-hit kills, in traps which are supposed to reward you with parts, but in reality resulted in punishing you for daring to engage with them. Here, the difficulty is substantially lower. Enemies do a great deal of damage, and if you engage with them in a straight up brawl, more often than not you'll take hits which will put you close to death. But with the ability to craft health kits or refill your health at the nearest save room, I found I constantly had 3 or so heals at any one time, and when you add your abilities like the auto dodge or the auto syringe to the mix, I found the later into the experience I went, the less I encountered the game over screen. Now I'm not saying I found this experience a breeze, far from it. All this did was reduce the annoyance, The frustration of beating your head against a brick wall time and time again by things that feel like they're outside of your control, which the first game seemed to revel in. The Evil Within 2 feels fair. Now if you're really craving a challenge, there's a couple of modes you unlock for completing the game. Classic, which reduces your save to 7 and doesn't allow for upgrades, and Akuma, which is reserved for those of you with the biggest balls imaginable. It's a mode where you die in a single hit. For those of you that rose up to the challenge and beat Akuma, shout out in the comments. You'll earn my praise before I tell you to touch grass. To summarise this section, The Evil Within 2 is a masterpiece in modern game design. Every system is tied together to create choice and allow freedom for the player to define their own path to success, but it never forgets what it is, a survival horror game. You may feel empowered to play how you want, but you never feel powerful. Releasing on the 8th generation of consoles in 2017, it's no surprise that Evil Within 2 looks incredible. From the rural suburbs of Anywhere Americana to the twisted hellscape of Theodore's Inner Sanctum, the environments are incredibly varied. The game elicited a number of E3 pans as I took in the out-of-this-world imagery on screen. Seeing Union collapse around you, with entire sections of the town floating in the distance, gave the team at Tango the opportunity to create the kind of vistas that take your breath away. The first game had some sensational settings, warping between different points seemingly at random, but here in The Evil Within 2, they tie it all together with the Marrow, a Mobius-designed back door to traverse around Union. It creates this juxtaposition between the cold concrete corridors and labs that make up the Marrow, and the sprawling outdoor areas within Union, giving us something familiar, but twisting it just enough to feel unique. With the 3-year difference in releases, the character models too have seen a huge step up from the first game. The amount of detail on offer here for every enemy and character have been dialed up, and it allows for seamless transitions between in-game cutscenes and gameplay. Now this has been achieved by using the STEM engine, a modified version of id Tech 5, which the team at Tango custom built for the project. Now, I'm not sure why they didn't move to id Tech 6, which had been used in the development of the 2016 masterpiece Doom, but regardless, it didn't seem to have any impact on the finished product. Now I played the game through on the PlayStation 5, and as such, I was able to play the game in backwards compatibility mode, which locks the frame rate to 60 and keeps the same resolution as the PS4 Pro version at 1296p. Throughout my 20-hour playthrough, I didn't encounter a single frame drop or bug. Now, I am playing on the fully patched game, so I'm not sure how it was at the gate, but in looking online, I'm not noticing anything that leads me to believe it was a mess on launch. And that's a great improvement from the original, which struggled to hold frames when it got chaotic, even on the PlayStation 5. Moving on to sound, it follows the same design philosophy as the first game. Enemies screech, moan and click, and it won't take long before these noises are burnt into your memory. You'll hear them on patrol before you see them, and you immediately know what you're getting yourself into. And all of this is accompanied by a soundtrack which is equally as memorable. Stemming back to the first game, The Evil Within as a franchise uses classical music to make any scene feel intimidating. Stefano's theme, in Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings in C major, is a real standout. And of course, the series' mainstay Claire de Lune returns for Sebastian's Room. But it goes harder than that. This soundtrack hits the emotional beats whenever they are required. Making Your Way Home, Sacrifice, The Ordinary World, they are all effective in eliciting an emotional response. And when it needs to go hard, to get the blood pumping, the game delivers. Masatoshi Yanagi delivers a soundtrack which ranks up there with the best in the genre. and I've tried to include as many as I can over this review. It's simply outstanding. Now it's about that time we get into the enemies. The Evil Within 2 brings some new enemies to the mix. Spawns. No, not him. They fill the same role as dogs in Resident Evil. It's a design which apes the Sentinel in the first game. They did the job, but didn't exactly blow me away. Now they are joined by these fat bastards.
Come here, I'm gonna eat you! I'm bigger than you, I'm higher in the food chain! Get in my belly!
No, not him. Gluttons, as they're called, are exactly what you'd expect. They are the same exploding monsters that seem to have appeared in every video game since Left 4 Dead. And speaking of Left 4 Dead, I wonder where they got these designs from. Now, as unoriginal as these enemies are, they do serve their intended purpose. The Lament spawns in enemies when it gets sight of you, and is able to take a stupid amount of ammo from direct attacks, forcing you into stealth, which it is highly perceptive of. More often than not, I'd find myself resorting to long-range combat to avoid the chance of it spotting me. Hysterics were terrifying on my first few encounters. They take 2 stealth attacks to take down, and when you land the first, they come barreling after you, knife in hand, like a cracked out hooker desperate for the next fix. I'm not ashamed to say I got sauced by her in the marrow. I blasted a cryptic fuck ton of ammo into her, shot her with more harpoons than Moby Dick, but she just kept coming. Trial and error is a blessing though, and as with the Harbinger, I was able to experiment enough to find a winning strategy. The final new addition is the Disciple. Now they are essentially beefed up Lost, with one change. They randomly set on fire. The kicker is, when they're engulfed in flame, you can't stealth kill them, which results in you having to change tactics on how to deal with them, especially when there's a few in the field. Now, I'm sounding quite negative on this part, but as unoriginal and uninspired as the majority of these are, there is a joy in figuring out how to overcome each type. And as I stated earlier in the gameplay section, when they're working as part of a group, it does present a worthy challenge. It's just a shame that with everything the game does better than the original, the enemies are nowhere near as memorable. Late into the game, you delve into Sebastian's mind and battle enemies from the first game, and all it did was cement how much better the designs were on the original outing. No one is as terrifying as Laura, or as unique as the Keeper, and that's a real shame. Boss-wise, there's less than the original, cutting them down from 9 to 7, with 2 of these bosses being used as a way to introduce new enemy types which will then roam the streets of Union in later chapters. But with this drop in unique bosses, they made one massive improvement. They don't kill you in one hit. Now don't get me wrong, they can be challenging, and I died a few times on my first encounter with the Guardian in particular, but it never became obnoxious. I never had a moment of pure rage or wide-eyed disbelief. I knew that whatever caused the game over screen was due to my own carelessness, and that's a major improvement over the original. The Evil Within 2 does everything a sequel should. It refines the systems, improves them on every level, and provides a compelling story with great characters. Setting the plot around Sebastian's family was the best choice to create emotional weight, and when you combine this with incredible visuals and a superb soundtrack, you ensure these emotional moments hit. From abject fear to sorrow, John Johannes and the team at Tango have turned me from an observer of the Evil Within to a fan. It's a franchise I would love to see return for a third entry. To put it bluntly, it's one of the best survival horror experiences I've ever had. It's painful to see how underrated and criminally underplayed the Evil Within as a franchise is, and for the second entry, Tango have cemented themselves as true masters of the genre. If you haven't visited Union before, I'd strongly encourage you to put 20 hours aside and plug yourself into STEM. It's an experience you won't forget. And that's it for this review. If you enjoyed it, put a like on it and let me know what you think of The Evil Within 2 in the comments. I try to reply to everyone on my channel, so I look forward to hearing from you. Coming up next is a review on Dead Space, before I move through the entire Dead Space franchise, so make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Now if you still want more from me, consider checking out my podcast, In PS We Trust. It's a fortnightly PlayStation podcast where me and my co-host crack a few beers and discuss the latest news, rumours and hype for all things PlayStation. I'll have links in the description. Thank you for your time. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.